There's- Okay. Hi, Bailey.
Hey, Matt, how are
Good
you?
to see you again.
Yeah, I don't see you yet. Are you on or are you just
Uh,
an audio?
I can see myself way back in the. Okay, there.
Oh, all right, now I
That's
see
closer.
you.
Yeah.
Hey,
Okay.
Matt.
Yeah. Great to see you again. How's
Good to see
everything
you.
at the island?
Good.
Any news?
I haven't heard a lot of news recently, but I know they're starting up their tours again.
Wonderful.
Trying to get back to normal capacity now, make some money.
Yeah, that's great.
Yep.
That's great. Okay.
Okay, we're live online, so we'll just wait until 7 here and then we'll get started.
Okay. Very good.
I'm gonna go ahead and mute your mic, Matt.
Okay.
Okay. We've got about 41 minutes of video, I think, about a third of the film. The pieces I've picked. You hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, I just wanted to tell Matt that I think it's a representative bunch of clips that that cover most of the important
Good.
areas.
That's very good.
One thing I want to apologize for. I forgot to send you the videos, the DVDs, so you could make a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
I already had the DVDs, so I went ahead and pulled those out. So I have them on my computer here to play.
Yeah, right. But Matt had asked me if I could send him a bunch of the DVDs for sale.
Right. Copies of the finished 91-minute program.
Yeah.
What I would suggest, Bailey, I'll be doing an exhibit at the old Mansfield, Ohio Artillery Show on the first weekend in May. And I was going to talk to the young men here about taking some of what we say tonight and maybe putting it in a little loop so I could run it as part of my exhibit. And in which case, at that time, if you could ship me a bunch of copies of your finished product, I would have them for over-the-counter sale. At most, I'd have to deduct Ohio sales tax or something like that.
Okay. Well, that
We'll
sounds
talk
great.
about it.
Yeah. No, that's great.
Okay.
What's the date of that show?
It's May, I think it's Saturday and Sunday, May 1st and 2nd.
Okay.
And I'll be setting up on Friday, April the 30th.
Okay. I will send you a bunch well in advance of that.
Okay.
And you can do a special show price to stimulate sales.
Okay.
I'm gonna, just a second, I'll throw you off the screen here.
Okay.
All right, you should be good to go, Matt.
Okay, I would like to welcome all you ladies and gentlemen here to our follow-up program to the Bannerman Island talk that I did back in April of 2019, 2 years ago. A few things happened shortly after that talk. Our young friends that have handled the technology then and again tonight were able to put a selection of that program on the internet, and it got quite a lot of circulation. And later in the summer of 2019, I had a communication from some of the leadership personnel at the Bannerman Island Trust. And I don't know if we really discussed it, but previously, but the island had been transferred to the state of New York back in 1968, 69. And ultimately, the state of New York sort of farmed out the management and care of the island to a nonprofit trust, which is doing some wonderful things. Anyway, they contacted me and they were very interested in some of the content that I presented to you folks back in 2 years ago. They then put me in touch with Mr. Bayley Silleck of Tarrytown, New York. I was notified, I got in touch with Bayley and found out that Bayley had been working on the same topic in more depth and with more professional expertise for over 10 or 15 years at that point, and had in production a very high quality definitive documentary on Francis Bannerman and the company. And so I suggested that tonight we use the technology available where we apologize that we can't be quite as smooth maybe as we were last time 2 years ago, but these restrictions of the COVID-19 situation have kind of make it a little. So if you bear with us, it's going to be a little different tonight. But I had the opportunity in September of 2019 to make a trip out to New York, and I met Bayley, and we did an interview, and I find him a very intriguing person. I think with a very interesting story about this part of the military collecting, and the way it kind of comes out of, to some extent, one person, Francis Bannerman. And so I'm going to ask Bayley tonight to perhaps tell you a little bit maybe about how he got interested in Civil War history that led him into the Bannerman Island story and the Francis Bannerman Company story. And so Bayley, would you like to take it over and tell our folks how you got interested and how you came to decide to do your program and how you kind of proceeded with it? And then I understand we have some selections of your finished program that will be integrated. So
now I'll be introducing. Oh, am I here?
Yep. Okay.
Am I visible?
I don't think so.
No.
Let's see. That's me up there. Yeah. We lost Bayley.
Well, do I?
There should be in the bottom left corner, like a camera icon. Is that grayed out?
It says unable to start. It says the host has stopped my video. So the host has to start my video. Okay. Are we okay?
Great.
All right. Okay, all set?
All set.
Well, I have a question to ask you guys first, everybody in the audience. I have a little teaser for you. How would you like to buy a 12-pounder parrot on a Navy carriage for $350? Any takers? Any takers? All right. Well, that's just, one of the many items, of course, that Bannerman had at even by today's standards, pretty exciting prices. Well, my story is very much like everybody else's who saw, got their hands on a Bannerman catalog when they were in their teens, and started leafing through it and thinking, oh my God, this is a cornucopia of stuff at ridiculous low prices. And I think I was in high school at the time, and sadly, I never got to the to go to the store at 501 Broadway, which closed my freshman year in college. So I always regretted that. And as I got into the film business, I realized, and I did many other things that took me away from the subject. And I didn't think about Bannerman until years later, when I was taking the train up the New York Central Railroad past the island and said, my God, look at that. That's extraordinary. And I realized that I'd also seen it in an Alfred Hitchcock movie called North by Northwest with Cary Grant. And so I thought, I've got to make a trip there. So I was able to contact one of it was in a ruin by that point. This is in the 70s, I guess, late or early 80s. And so I was able to arrange a trip there. And when I arranged a trip there, I realized that nothing really had been done except for a couple of short videos about the castle ruins themselves, but nothing about the the entire story of Francis Bannerman and his enterprise, which is the real story. The castle is one of the great images, but the real story is how Francis Bannerman, as an immigrant, began to essentially create the Army-Navy surplus business. Okay, can everybody hear okay? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. What happened? Are you there? I don't hear.
I can hear you.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I just okay. So I'll go on until anybody tells me that there's a problem. Just a little bit of background before I show you the first clip. I'm going to show you 6 clips from the film, which is about an hour and a half film. And I guess just to step back a second, I always like doing films which fill a niche, especially in the kinds of history films that I've done. You know, I've often been surprised when I say, well, gee, that's a really interesting subject. Has anybody done a movie about it? And a lot of times people say no. For example, when I was living in Virginia a few years ago, I was living right on the banks of the Rappahannock River in Fredericksburg. And as an old Civil War buff, including growing up partly on a farm just outside Falmouth, which had a battery from the Rhode Island Light Artillery on it and finding artifacts and so on. I was always very intrigued by, you know, Fredericksburg history and the Civil War and so on. And I was told that no one's ever done a film about the Rappahannock River, both in terms of its geography, its ecology, its history. And of course, it played a huge role as a barrier between North and South in the Civil War. And that's a large part of the film. And so I made a film for an organization called the Friends of the Rappahannock, and it filled a particular niche. And everybody said, oh my gosh, how come no one has ever done a film about the Rappahannock before? So it was sort of similar with Bannerman. I kept asking around and everybody said, well, you know, a lot of films about the castle, but almost nothing about Francis Bannerman. Plenty of articles written, but never a film, never a visual exploration of his importance and so on. So anyway, I began this film just shooting a few excerpts at the castle and in between other film projects that I had. So that's why it took me 10 years to do this film. And I finally determined 2 years ago that I was going to finish this film one way or the other. And the other motivating factor actually in getting the film done was that, of course, a lot of people my age and older are dying off. The guys that actually visited the 501 Broadway, the famous store, who actually visited the castle in its days when it was less than the ruin that is today. So I wanted to get a lot of people on, on camera as if nothing else, an archive. For example, Norman Flaterman, whom all of you know, one of the great experts on American antique arms. And he was wonderful. He invited us down to Florida and we spent a couple of days with him and filmed him. So I tried to do as many of these guys as possible. I don't know how many are in the film, but of about 15, 16, 17 of them, probably about a third of them have passed on to their reward now. And I'm very glad that I was able to get their memories on camera for history. So the first piece I want to show you is at the beginning of Francis's career. Just a quick background. Francis Bannerman was born in 1851 in Scotland. He came over with his father and mother to the United States as an immigrant at about the age of 6. And his father was in the junk business. And it's thought that he was in the Navy, but had been wounded. And he actually died when Francis was quite a young man. But at the same time, what was happening was that in the aftermath of the Civil War, a huge number of auctions took place. It's almost as if the U.S. government wanted to literally dump everything that they had out of their arsenals from New York to California at the lowest, at the best price they could get, but at whatever price they could get. And the first auction was actually right in 1865. So, and everything went up for sale. I mean, literally, cannon, accoutrements, rifle. I mean, you name it, they sold it. And Francis Bannerman very early realized that, along with other more established directors, dealers like Schuyler, Hartley, and Graham in New York City, they realized this was a tremendous buying opportunity. So I want to start the first clip with the end of the Civil War and that surplus of arms and equipment that took place. So can we roll the clip number one? This is about a 7-minute clip. Then I'll come back, explain the next one.
Some of them were in Manhattan. Others were on Governor's Island. And he would go to those auctions and compete with other people who were in the same business. One of his best coups with respect to buying at auction was that they would announce that the auction was going to be held at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. some particular day. Well, he would note that.
He would go to the office where the auction was going to be held, and he would talk to the auctioneer and say, can't we have it a day or two before that? And they would do that, and sometimes they would either forget to re-notify everybody when the auction would be, and the auction was held, and Bannerman would be with the only bidder.
From age 30, Francis Bannerman personally attended as many government auctions as possible, keeping scrupulous notes on the bidding. A favorite Bannerman ploy was to bid in fractions of a cent. At one auction, he bid just a fraction over 2 cents for each Army cartridge box and 63/100ths of a cent for each leather rifle sling. Bannerman also kept close track of bidding by others like W. Stokes Kirk of Philadelphia, often a rival, but at times a collaborator in a bid-rigging scheme.
In times when things got bad for all of them, they would get together and designate one of them to represent all of them at some of the auctions. And so there really wasn't any auction.
Bannerman, for what he was most interested in, was working with other dealers in what is now totally illegal. They had a pool, and the pool said who was agreed on beforehand and said who was going to get what from which auction.
In spite of such machinations, government auctions proliferated across the country, selling nearly everything that the Army and Navy of the past had used, from buttons, buckles, and backpacks, to saddles and swords, pistols and drums, flags, canteens, and cannons. Thousands of pieces of Civil War artillery, from smoothbore cannon to rifled guns, were sold off at scrap prices, like these giant Parrott guns. and many of them wound up in Bannerman's ordnance yard on Bergen Street in Brooklyn, along with cases and cases of live shells. We have to wonder if it made the neighbors nervous. The first of what would become the coveted and collectible Bannerman catalogs were issued in the 1880s, displaying all the Civil War surplus he was rapidly accumulating. The prices, low as they seem to us today, included a hefty profit margin for the company, indicating just how cheaply the U.S. government was disposing of its huge stores of outmoded arms. In 1881, 8 U.S. arsenals had simultaneously sold off tens of thousands of guns imported from Europe for the Civil War. Bannerman's bids ranged from 11.5 cents to 20.25 cents per gun, and no doubt he won many of them. In 1882, at New York Arsenal, he bid successfully for 933 Colt revolving rifles and carbines at an average price of 55 cents each, 2 Henry rifles for $1.70 each, and a huge lot of 2,500 .69 caliber rifle muskets for 62 cents each. The total bill, $2,003.42, or a fraction of what 1 Colt revolving rifle or carbine sells for on today's antique arms market. While the War Department considered it scrap, Bannerman soon realized that there was a growing demand among Civil War veterans and sportsmen for the weaponry and accoutrements of that tragic conflict. Once, only the wealthy could afford to collect antique arms. Now, almost anyone could acquire good, if not museum quality, militaria at affordable prices. Bannerman and his competitors were democratizing the field of arms collecting. After growing his business for nearly 20 years in Brooklyn, Bannerman now knew that he had to go where the money was, Manhattan. In 1891, he opened a store near Wall Street, then moved nearby to 27 Front Street. But at the same time, Bannerman embarked on what proved to be a rare misadventure in his successful business career, manufacturing a new firearm.
What I'm holding is a model 1896 Spencer repeating shotgun manufactured in Brooklyn, New York by Francis Bannerman. Christopher Spencer, who also developed the Civil War carbine, later collaborated with Sylvester Roper on 3 patents, which led to the manufacture in 1894 of the first shotgun of this type. Francis Bannerman stepped in the year 1890 and bought the machining produced by Pratt & Whitney and moved the operation from Windsor, Connecticut to Brooklyn, New York, where he produced the shotgun in 4 separate models from 8.
Okay. All right, so that was the first bit. The next clip I want to show you is a few years later. Of course, as I said, Francis Bannerman acquired a gigantic amount of stuff from the Civil War, and he still had tons of it. You know, later, even up into the 50s, there was stuff left. But in 1898 came another windfall with the breakout of the Spanish-American War, and now I want to show you that bit and some of the things he acquired from that war as well. So next clip.
Imagined that his already vast stock of arms was about to expand exponentially. With the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, the Spanish-American War broke out at sea and on land, from Cuba to the Philippines. The war was over in less than 14 weeks, but it had generated a tremendous amount of military surplus. Soon after the defeated Spanish troops evacuated Cuba, Bannerman was in Havana, making deals for the spoils of war. He even tried to buy the wrecks of Spanish warships. And when it was raised from Havana Harbor, Bannerman bought some of the equipment of the Maine.
Well, I think one of the great thrills of reading the Bannerman catalog was seeing the type of things that they handled and which were being made available to the collector of all types. Just reading the catalog was a thrill, especially for a youngster, and knowing that maybe someday I can now aspire to owning such a piece myself, but not being able to, of course. Well, now that I've been years as a dealer, the thrill of actually owning such pieces never ceases when I get a chance to do it. I think a classic example of a piece that always interested me, even as a beginner in this field, was one that Bannerman's had in many of their catalogs, even though they weren't for sale in later years, but they still ran the illustrations of what happened. Well, here's an original 1907 Bannerman's catalog. A full page devoted to the 30 or 35 rifles, or the Winchester Lee rifles, that were actually brought up from the Maine that Bannerman purchased and sold in their catalogs. Interesting enough, Bannerman's had the foresight, after they bought these guns, to ask the government and the U.S. Navy Department to supply them with a list of those serial numbers, which were unimportant to most people at the time. And Bannerman's not only reproduced their correspondence with the Navy, but the Navy's answer, which included the serial numbers of that small group of rifles, Winchester Lees, that were brought up. And the fun of handling things in this business is not handling rare items, but having items with a history, and especially a history that can be proven. And nothing can be better proven than a serial number of a gun documented by the Navy itself and written up in a catalog such as Bannerman's. And here, to my great thrill, is the kind of stuff I love handling the most. It's actually a Winchester Lee bolt-action rifle bought by the Navy Department, issued to the Marine contingent aboard the USS Maine. All major ships have Marines aboard, contingents aboard them, and fully documented by serial number of this gun in this original 1907 Bannerman catalog. They probably had it in earlier catalogs, but I don't have an issue early in 1907, which in itself is a great collector's item.
In the years following the war with Spain, Bannerman would claim, with some justification, that he had acquired 90% of the arms and equipment used by both sides.
From the Spanish-American War, he bought a lot of Mausers. Mausers were a big deal for him, the Mauser rifle. It was something that the American public didn't know much about. So Bannerman made use of these captured pieces that he had gotten from the Spanish-American War, making them into sporting rifles, the best sporting rifle you could buy for that kind of money. He was getting them for next to nothing. He was making them into sporters, and the people were buying.
Country.
Okay, so having acquired all this Civil War stuff and huge amounts of Pan Am War stuff, and also at the same time, I have to remember that Bannerman was buying from Europe as well. He was trading a lot of Civil War and Pan Am equipment and guns with Belgium, German, and English dealers. And in fact, he had set up a large warehouse in Liège, Belgium, which of course is a famous arms manufacturing place and has been for centuries. And he also had a huge waterfront warehouse in Brooklyn, in addition to his Broadway store, his first Broadway store. Well, anyway, but along comes about 1905, he realizes that he has got a ton of stuff, and a lot of it is live ammunition and tons of black powder. And the city officials of New York and Brooklyn are getting a little antsy about this stuff being in amongst the population. And so Bannerman is looking around for some place that he can move some of this stuff that would be safer, and he could expand exponentially. So then, in the next clip, we see how he acquires the island and builds the castle. And so let's roll clip number 3, please.
Seemingly spacious store on Broadway and his warehouse in Brooklyn were now at capacity, and much of that growing stock was live ammunition and gunpowder by the ton. Canoeing the Hudson above West Point in 1900, young David Bannerman noticed a private and deserted island. It was just what the company needed to store its hazardous materials and vast stocks of militaria. Later that year, his father made a deal with the island's owner, Mary Taft, buying the island with $600 cash and a $1,000 mortgage. The seller's only proviso? No alcohol to be made or sold on the island in perpetuity. Bannerman's frequent trips to Europe, often with his wife and business partner Nellie, and the scrapbooks they kept, inspired him to build not just another warehouse on the island, but something much more ambitious, something truly grand. Francis decided that he would be his own architect, and he began sketching out his vision of what would come to be known as Bannerman's Island Arsenal. In 1901, he began making his vision a reality.
In 1901, when Mr. Bannerman first started building the castle complex, he built the #1 arsenal on the north side of the island. It's very similar to the Spencer building that he also owned, which was in Brooklyn. In 1905, he starts building a full castle-like structure, and he starts using influences from all over the world. Scottish baronial, obviously. I think there's some Moorish influences. There's influences from Antwerp, Belgium that we've discovered. And in a sense, by his using those architectural influences from all over the world and other castles, he's really created a true piece of Americana. And, you know, if you think about it, what Mr. Bannerman could have built here, which would have been a simple, brick box, he really left us something way more valuable because he built something that has architectural details and elements and style that certainly goes beyond just being a pile of bricks.
With the island arsenal still under construction and an apparent surplus of cash, Francis decided to purchase his own property on Lower Broadway, a former piano factory located near his existing lease at 579 Broadway. Its owner was the Metropolitan Museum of Art, whose board was initially unsure about selling to a firearms dealer. Francis shrewdly proposed to include a military history museum above the store, and on June 29, 1905, for a price of $155,000, the deal was done. For the next 50 years, 501 Broadway would become a mecca for antique arms collectors everywhere. For Francis, Nellie, and their children, Brooklyn remained their home base, moving in 1906 to an apartment in the upscale Hotel Margaret, overlooking the harbor. But soon they had a second home on their island in the Hudson, a mini castle residence where they could escape the summer heat, and Francis could supervise construction and shipping operations. On its walls were reminders of Francis's Scottish heritage, As a break from work, Francis often invited disadvantaged kids from the streets of Brooklyn to enjoy a summer day on the island. In addition to the island, Francis had purchased underwater rights around it, enabling the creation of a protected harbor busy with barges and lighters arriving full of goods purchased from government auctions, and others departing downriver with cargo to be shipped to European and South American buyers. In August 1914, World War I broke out in Europe. 3 years later, when it appeared that the U.S. might finally intervene, Bannerman wrote to the New York National Guard, offering to sell thousands of rifles and pistols, plus 234 Gatling guns, 1,750,000 cartridges, and 3 million primers. It's not clear whether the Guard responded.
During the period of World War I, Mr. Bannerman was very philanthropic. He outfitted an entire Scottish regiment at his own expense. He sent a barge load of uniforms and blankets to the Belgian war relief. So he was very, very active in supporting the war effort. Unfortunately, he was also kind of accused of profiteering because he had purchased some 6-inch naval cannons. They were obsolete surplus guns. They were brought to the island. They were repaired, new mounts, new sights. So they were brought somewhat up to date and offered for sale. What would happen? On April Fool's Day of 1918, a subchaser would come to the island, land on the island, and the crew of the vessel board the island. They break into the powder house looking for evidence that Mr. Bannerman was somehow profiteering. Unfortunately, he was not here at the time. He was recovering from gallbladder surgery. And the Navy was here, we're sure, for a number of months during a period of time where Mr. Bannerman sadly was being defamed.
In Washington, both the Senate and the House heatedly debated whether Francis Bannerman was a war profiteer. He had in fact purchased naval guns of the type mounted on cruisers like the USS Newark at a pre-war government scrap auction for about $80 apiece. Now the government wanted them back, and Bannerman was said to have priced them at $15,000 each. The Bannerman controversy takes up several pages of the congressional record of 1918. Some lawmakers accused Bannerman of attempting to defraud the government.
This man Bannerman was guilty of the boldest piece of profiteering, the boldest piece of effrontery that has ever come to my attention since I've been a member of Congress. He was demanding $15,000 apiece for obsolete, second-hand naval guns.
Others defended him and blamed government policy.
I was not criticizing Mr. Bannerman. It is the miserable system under which the ordnance is handled and disposed of by the Navy Department that I am condemning most strongly.
In the end, Congress relented and agreed to pay Bannerman over $6,000 for each of the 6-inch naval guns.
And he had also, as part of the arrangement of the sale, donated 2 cannons for free with a $20,000 donation. So to reference this man as profiteering when you take the bigger picture, I think is most unfortunate.
In September 1918, the controversial guns were hoisted off the castle dock and one by one loaded onto lighters. Total weight, nearly 200 tons. In nearby Beacon, New York, they were transferred to rail cars bound for the Federal Arsenal at Watervliet near Albany. Ironically, World War I ended just 2 months later. As New Yorkers celebrated the armistice, Francis Bannerman VI was in increasingly ill health. On November 26, 1918, at the age of 67, he died at his home at the Hotel Margaret.
To that sort of thing.
Well, I found this.
Okay. the next clip you'll see is moves forward to the period during and after Francis Bannerman's two sons took over the business, and they didn't add a lot to it. They did acquire more things like suits of armor and antique arms, some African and more and sort of exotic weapons, that sort of thing. And the business continued to be fairly profitable for the next 30, 40 years. And in the next clip, we interview some more people who had the fortunate experience of going to the famous 501 Broadway store and later to the island. So this is sort of direct testimony from some of the people I was fortunate enough to get on camera and as a permanent record. So here's the next one.
Bannerman catalog in an attic in Union, New Jersey, and I lived in South Orange, and I read it over and over and over again, and almost to the point of memorizing quite a bit of it. It was dated 1945, and this was 1953, and I said, this company can't still be in business with all this stuff. So I sent them a letter, and I got a postcard back, dated April 17th, 1953. Store hours are 8:30 to 4:30, Saturday 8:30 to 12. Military goods catalog issue 1949 was circular $1.50, circular only 10 cents. Francis Bannerman, 501 Broadway, New York.
The popularity of Bannerman's catalogs continued for many years to lure customers from across the nation to the now fabled 501 Broadway store.
And we came to the 501 number, and there was a glass window at each side of an opening door, 501 on the door, big as life. And in the window was some military goods and uniforms and the shell of a Gatling and Civil War data. Oh, this looks wonderful. We opened the main door and walked in, and facing me was a huge staircase, all folded out, looked like something out of Gone with the Wind. And it went up, obviously, to a second floor and balconied all around. And all around it, going up the stairs, were muskets and things tied to the railings and sides. And then the walls, which were about 10 feet from the stairs, were covered top to bottom. These walls had to be 20 feet high, as they built buildings in those days. And they were just covered with every kind of gun and paraphernalia, sword and whatnot. And there were mannequins standing all around, and all over the floor around the edges, cannonballs and gear, every kind of Civil War accoutrement imaginable.
Well, we got off the bus and crossed the street and walked in the door. And as we walked in the door, we noticed immediately this wonderful odor of old leather, old wood, and oil. And that to us was one of the sweetest smells there was.
I remember walking in and particularly noticing the odor, because there was a strong odor in Bannerman's building. It was an old building, and it was full of old things, kind of moldy. And that smell I remember, and I know that even now, when you encounter a number of Bannerman items in one place, you will smell it.
Now, 1938 was still, the Depression was still in full swing, so we didn't have much money. And after all our examining of the whole store, we went back to the bargain table, which was just inside the main door, and there was the sign which said, any gun on this table, $2.50. So that was for us. And we examined every gun on the table, and we each came up with a model 1868 trapdoor Springfield 50-70 caliber.
In 1950, I was married in 1950 and had one child, and we were visiting my aunt in New York City, And I decided I better go see what Bannerman's looked like, because I had picked up a few more guns and I was getting interested in antique guns and militaria. And so I got on the subway and went down to 501 Broadway, and I went into Bannerman's, and it was a treasure trove.
My first step through the huge front doors, which were, I guess, about 10 feet tall, and I think I was in Mecca. On the right-hand side, when you went in, they had a junk table with some old sharps, you know, pieces, parts, rusty stuff. On the left-hand side were showcases and drawers full of belt buckles and that type of stuff. And it was an interesting experience. My first purchase were these two Civil War belt buckles, $1.50 each.
And the man took me down to the basement, and they had more stuff stuffed in barrels. I didn't have any more money, and I couldn't carry any more anyway. I only bought what I could carry out of there, and I had money for it. But it was an awakening, and I really got into collecting that day, really collecting.
I walked into the store, I took one look, and I knew I'd be there for the rest of my life. I mean, that was it. That was what I was going to do. And thank God I was able to do it.
We took a trip to New York City in the spring of 1954. I think it was in March. And I had an ambition achieved in going to 501 Broadway and seeing the store. And it was just like the catalog depicted it. And I could have stayed there the entire trip, and they almost had to pull some of us out of the store to go and continue going to West Point, Annapolis, and the other places we visited. But it was, at least on my agenda, one of the top items that I wanted to see if I was going to New York City. I wanted to see Francis Bannerman.
Nice, baby, nice!
Just below this.
Yeah.
I used to take the bus from home in Clifton, New Jersey, into the Port Authority, and then I would walk down to Broadway, to 501 Broadway, to the store, in order to save the 10, 15 cents that the subway cost, because round trip, that was an extra 30 cents.
A group of boys could cut grass, shovel snow, take public transportation, have a few bucks for transportation, a few dollars, literally $1 for lunch, and have $3 or $4 to buy something from the American Civil War. And you could take the public transportation and carry the weapon home, and nobody was concerned about their well-being. A different era, a different world.
He still had the wicker chair Admiral Dewey sat in for the Battle of Manila Bay. He had the dynamite gun that came from Teddy Roosevelt. There were tons of stuff. And over the counter where they did their business, they probably had 35 or more Civil War battle flags, both Union and Confederate, which today you could retire on. You'd never have to work a day in your life. And there they were. He wouldn't sell them. They weren't for sale. And when the place fell apart, from what I understand, the Smithsonian got them, which is the right place for them.
When you walked into 501 Broadway, it was like heaven to a person who was interested in antique weaponry. I mean, you looked in and you were just amazed. There was one whole wall that was nothing but every single firearm that was ever made, I think. You know, you could find matchlocks, flintlocks, percussions, everything was there. He had one of everything lined up on the wall. There were cannon shells from round balls to 10-pound shells to 100-pounders to 300-pounders, 13-inch balls, 16-inch round balls, all on the floors, just lined up one after the other. It was a...
So that's what happened.
Okay. So in the next segment, we're going to talk about the later history of Bannerman Island and what happened there. Clearly, it was crammed with stuff. In the latter days of the company, a lot of it was sold off, moved to other storehouses. but a lot of stuff remained on the island. And as we'll see, there was one big problem that had to be solved by Bannerman. This is David Bannerman and his brother. When they later on they wanted to sell it. Actually, it was Charles, David's son by that time, who decided that the island would be sold. I'm guessing that was around the late 50s. They made the decision, and it finally got sold in the 60s. In any case, here's an excerpt starring in part, I believe, someone you'll know very well, and talks about the artillery that was everywhere on the island and what was done about it. Okay, let's run it.
When they were going to sell the island to the state of New York, the state of New York said, hey, there's still an awful lot of explosives on that island. You have to clean everything off before we'll buy it. So they contacted the Army, Navy, and Air Force, all of their explosive ordnance units. They all refused. They said, we're not going to do it. We know somebody crazy enough to do it, and that's Val Forget. So they contacted me. We went over, we cut a deal, and I was to go up. And I spent a summer on the island, combing it from one end to the other, tracking down all the artillery shells that had blown all over, going through the castle, digging out shells from the Civil War through the Spanish-American War that were laying everywhere, that were rotting, that were oozing explosives. Most of it was the old picric acid and the brown flake powder. Now, picric acid is probably the most unstable explosive known. And we got away with what we did.
In the summer of 1958, I had the rare, unique opportunity to go to work for Val Forget Jr., who owned Service Armament Company in Bogota, New Jersey. And this was great. I figured that I would be working in the gun store and learning that business because I was interested in it myself. As it turned out, Val was in negotiations with the Bannerman people. The idea being to go to Bannerman's Island, where the castle was, and the purpose of the visit would be to remove all explosive ordnance. Val asked me if I would like to live in the castle for the summer of 1958 and help remove all the munitions there. And that began my very exciting summer as a resident of Bannerman's Island. When we got there, there were thousands of rounds of 37 millimeter and 40 millimeter Hotchkiss mountain gun ammunition. Mainly the 40 millimeter was that single barrel, single shot Hotchkiss cannon. The other stuff fit in a revolving cannon like a gigantic Gatling gun configuration. In addition to that, there were tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of rounds of 43 Spanish ammunition. It was extraordinary. I mean, it was surreal. It was unlike anything that you could imagine in your wildest dreams. There were just bullets and parts and explosive things and fuses, cannonballs, loaded and unloaded. It was extraordinary. I mean, you really can't adequately describe it. The way Val had configured the thing so that it could be safely dismantled, the explosive shells removed, or the projectiles rather, removed from the shells. He built a machine that used like a rubber tired wheel and a big plate, half-inch thick steel plate with a hole cut in it. And you would stick the shell in there and it would stop when it got to the base. And then you clamped it with a big pair of vice grip, modified vice grip pliers, gigantic ones, to clamp the bullet, and then you would turn the wheel and it would pull the shell from the projectile. Well, it worked great, but it took about a minute or 45 seconds to unload. Plus, then you had to take a wrench and pull the fuse out of the projectile and dump the powder into a can. So all told you could take a minute per round, and we had 40,000 rounds roughly to disarm. And it was hot. It was like July and August of the summer up there. It was hot and nasty, and I was getting frustrated because I was all alone just taking apart hundreds of rounds of these loaded cannon shells. And in frustration one day, I just took a live round and whacked it against the plate that was part of the machine. And I just had a hunch that maybe I had loosened it. So I grabbed the projectile with my left hand and it pop, it came right out effortlessly. And I tried another one, whacked it, pulled it, whacked it, pulled it. I cut my time down to a fraction of what it was. And when Val got back to the island that weekend, he said, "Oh, that machine is working great." He said, "You're really making time with this." And I said, "Watch." And I went whack and pulled it. And he got all over me about that. He seemed to think it was dangerous. In my spare time, I would uproot out in a field of poison ivy, uproot cannon projectiles from the Civil War. Some were loaded, some were not. And there were hundreds of them. One of the interesting artifacts that I saw every day that I was working there was this huge muzzle-loading cannon. This was a big cannon. It must have been 10 feet long. And I asked somebody, I think the caretaker, I said, "Do you know anything about the cannon?" And he said, "Yeah, it was the deck cannon from Admiral Farragut's flagship."
My agreement with the Bannermans is I would give my word that there were no explosives left on the island. And walking down to the boat, just the sun was just getting late in the day, there had always been two huge naval shells that were probably as tall as this room, as little landmarks there. And I looked at the shells and I said to myself, God, they can't be loaded. But I said, I have to check because there were ornaments, there were monuments. As you saw, 140-pound valve, scrambled up it. I'm there, arm around it. A friend of mine tossed me up a Stilson wrench, unscrew the brass fuse. Threw it down, they threw me up a flashlight, I looked down inside, they were loaded. Getting late, my last day, the edge of the river. I slid down, went to the other one, scrambled up, didn't give a damn, big Stilson wrench on the fuse, threw the fuse in the river, slid down, and we pushed them, splash, into the river. I think the statute of limitations is over for pollution.
For Val Forget, the Bannerman artillery contract provided a windfall of deactivated Civil War shells, and they became a staple of his own sales catalogs for years to come. In 1959, Charles Bannerman closed the fabled 501 Broadway store, a mecca for antique arms collectors for over 50 years. The last photos of its interior show that it was still stuffed with items of all kinds, but now in dusty and rusty disarray. At the direction of Charles Bannerman, the store's last manager, World War II veteran James Hogan, loaded up all the stock and moved it to the picturesque village of Blue Point, Long Island, where he opened a more modest Bannerman store near the beach. When the Broadway store was about to be sold, the prospective owners got a nasty shock. Many of the old artillery shells from the Civil War and the Spanish-American War were still there. Police and firemen were called, offices evacuated, traffic in subways disrupted, as the shells were gingerly removed, transported to the docks, and dumped into the ocean. The smaller Bannerman catalogs, issued from Blue Point by James Hogan in the 60s and 70s, still offered tens of thousands of antique gun parts, among many other things. The collectors of militaria who wandered its crowded sales room could often come across something surprising, even unique.
still in 1965 at Blue Point, Long Island at Bannerman's, you could still find some very interesting objects. James Hogan told me that this tin bathtub was used by officers on the USS Constitution sometime in the 1840s. It was the only one he had left. I took it. In addition to that, he showed me upstairs, Blue Point, Long Island location, some pikes that he still had. These are pikes to repel boarders. And it was also, this one is also from the U.S. Constitution.
In the early 60s, the island arsenal still held a vast amount of military goods. Rifles, Gatling guns, and other firearms were gone. The roof and the floors were rotted and dangerous, but room after room were filled with unsold accoutrements. Many crates remained unopened, their contents unknown. Charles Bannerman knew that cleaning everything out for a potential sale to New York State would be an enormous task. So from 1961 to 1968, he encouraged dealers and collectors like Bernie Mitchell, known as the Bull Run Trader, to come to the island and find and buy whatever they wanted.
It's my understanding that after Mr. Forget removed a lot of material from the islands, many other dealers became interested in bulk purchases of materials, and Bernie Mitchell and other dealers got onto the island, took much better quality stuff than we found there 5 years later. But as things progressed, the inventory became more scrambled, and more smaller collectors and dealers such as myself and my friends were able to get permission through Mr. Hogan to check in with Clem, the caretaker, and get access to the island. Clem made a paper list of everything at the end of our 2 or 3 days stay, and then he mailed it to Blue Point, and then by the time we got home a day or two later, we had a bill.
Clem, I don't believe he's with us anymore, was the caretaker, and he had a trailer across the river. And every night he would go back to his trailer and we would stay on the island. We had basic shelter and Coleman lanterns. And when he went back, we would watch until the light in his trailer went out. And then we'd get up, turn on the lanterns, and we'd start moving about the island, getting stuff packed into crates, down in the dock and across the river at night into the van. Was it legal? No, but it was sure a hell of a lot of fun. But Bernie had some ways of doing things that, well, again, I was a young lad and I worked for him. Up in the second floor were cannon wheels. Today they're worth quite a bit of money, and there must have been 200 or 300 of them lined up. Well, again, after Clem went back across, we had our cannon wheels loaded in the truck, but Bernie wanted to protect his investment. So we get up at night and we'd roll the cannon wheels down the long lead-in under the grate, the portcullis, and they would hit the capstan and they'd bounce into the river. And I can't tell you how many cannon wheels we threw in the river. So we spent a whole night of removing the excess, let's say. And I guess today it doesn't mean much, but I'd give anything to have the stuff that we threw in the river.
In history.
Okay, one final short clip. We wanted to, toward the end of the movie, this is about the next to last piece in the movie. We wanted to show where a lot of these items have ended up, which is typical gun shows across the country. And also to assess what was the legacy, what is Bannerman's legacy? What is his influence on those of us around today and collecting and participating? And so this is the Hartford Antique Gun Show, which unfortunately is no longer going, but was a very, very good show at the time we were filming. And I think it represents the opinions of most collectors and dealers today about Bannerman's legacy. So let's roll this final clip.
to me, Bannerman was the person that saved everything for us to collect. If it wouldn't have been for Francis Bannerman and W. Stokes Kirk and people like that, nothing would exist. It would have all gone to the junk pile.
Today, Bannerman's is a name that's familiar to every collector. If a beginning collector will quickly learn the name Bannerman's. He was really the granddaddy of collectors.
So Bannerman's encouraged people all over the world. There's no question about it. The stuff was there. And it's still today. He's still turning up stuff.
And here was the things he bought, which you'll find here today are these carbines, U.S. military carbines. There are tables full of them here in the show. A lead carbine. People don't even realize how rare these are.
If you're a collector, I don't think there's anyone that doesn't have some tidbit of Bannerman. May not even know it is, but it's all over the place. And it still demands a decent premium.
The cachet that surrounds an item, having been in Bannerman, certainly adds wonderful provenance to a piece.
A lot of people, to his credit, will say this came from Bannerman. I mean, you hear that routinely. It just shows you how widespread his influence was.
And they had the most beautiful guns and bayonets and barrel pulls. I remember Colt Navies, $12 a piece with the grease on them. Would you believe it?
Yeah.
Today, I think that the hobby of arms, of collecting arms, owes a great deal to Bannerman. I think he showed a way of selling things beyond their period of use to people who wanted to just have them, to have a souvenir, to feel close to history, to understand, as we would want to today, to understand history through material culture.
Material culture, artifacts, are a touchstone. Whether you're talking about material from Bannerman's, whether you're looking at a Revolutionary War musket, whether you go to a medieval castle and see a sword. So Bannerman served its purpose. It allowed those pieces of history, in many cases, to pass on to another generation and then another generation. So it's probably at least 3 generations that acquired Bannerman material in a collecting sense.
Okay, so that's the end of the clips from the film is about 91 minutes. So you saw about 40 minutes of it, and it's a bit obviously a bit disjointed this way, but at least you get a flavor of Bannerman's. I mean, I'm sure to many of you this is a familiar subject, but I'm hoping that everybody who watches it will have found out something a little bit new about Bannerman that maybe they didn't know before, and to increase, the general appreciation of what he has done for the Army, Navy surplus and collecting world that we all enjoy so much today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt.
Bayley, I sure appreciate your being with us tonight, remotely as we are. Do we have any questions from any of the folks here in the audience about what they've seen tonight? And I can repeat the question. Maybe Bayley can handle it for us. Is there anyone here got any questions? Okay. Yeah. All right. Darian, do you have any electronic? No. Okay. So I guess we surely appreciate all you've done for us. And to repeat, if you'd like to talk to me a little later, we can see if we could perhaps run some portion of this on a little loop at that Ohio artillery show. I know a lot of people there would enjoy even a smaller fragment of what we've seen tonight, so if you don't mind. So we'll talk about that. Okay?
Okay, thank you, Matt.
Okay, one last shot at questions? Okay, I guess Thank you very much for your evening.
Okay. Thank you.